Okay, that didn't last long. Wife barged in immediately. Okay, let me go over this real quick. Okay, so this is the Bleeding Edge build, the way I think it's most effective. I think it's most effective with a one-hander and a interact, a catalyst, because it allows you to cast spells and act as a allow it to act as a steroid, giving you a lot of flat damage that you're then rolling into the multipliers that you get off your tree and you get from the Bleeding Edge itself from the node that stacks based on the ailments. So in this particular case, I have to use a dagger and I have to use a catalyst. Can't use a gun because then I'm unable to use some of the I'm unable to use Bleeding Edge unless I had Bleeding Edge on my catalyst, and the dagger allows me to accomplish everything I need to. The Mackfesten gives you basically 25 to 30% of your spell damage as extra damage. It's very similar to this node here, Residual Energy, where you're getting 30% of your spell damage into attacks, and then that gets multiplied further still. So these are almost identical. I compared it to other catalysts where I had, effectively like flat spell damage that's going to roll into your Bleeding Edge through things like this. 11% of damage from the last spell cast, and similar to Residual Energy on the tree. But it seems as though currently, whether it's a tooltip bug or it's an actual bug, the amount of flat damage that you're getting applied to your skill appears to be a base value. So I don't think it's calculated off of any additive damage that you have. But in either case, the amount of damage you get is substantial. So currently, the tooltip average damage for Bleeding Edge is 25k. If I go and I drop even one spell, right, we're at 46k, right? So ultimately, it's not quite a doubling, but it's near there. It's at least 40% more damage coming out of that. The way that the build functions is similar to the way most Bleeding Edge builds are functioning off of this rune right here, where you're getting damage per ailment stack. It used to be something absurd like 20% per ailment stack, and now it's down to 2. But nevertheless, it's still one of the highest ways to scale Bleeding Edge damage as far as I know. So ultimately, the name of the game is to stack as many ailments as you can, up to 30, and have those on the target. Okay, so the way in which I'm going to do that is with spells. So in this particular case, I'm getting Aether from Anomaly. I'm getting Shock and Weakness from my Lightbringer when I'm not stunning. I get Poison and Bleed from Bleeding Edge, except in reality, the bleed stacks are not going to be maintainable. The bleed is actually going to fall off because as I bolster the damage from any of the other elements, my Bleeding Edge is going to take as a second affix, a second ailment, whatever the damage type I did. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. I need to figure out a way to get it so that the bleed persists or is coming from a different source to be ultimately the highest min-max I can possibly be. But in reality, the amount of damage output you get this way is filthy. It's like, the highest output from Bleeding Edge that I've seen. Much higher than, using anything in a shield, and certainly much higher than a two-hander. Okay, and then I use Juggernaut, which this can be interchanged for a lot of different things. You can use Liver Mortis, and you can use this rune for the mitigating of the damage reduction. Juggernaut I like just because it's situational. It has a little bit of a reliable stun. You could use Bulwark of Dawn if you really wanted to for regen. Not really a huge fan of it, to be honest, especially because I went towards Lightbringer, which I'll explain also why I think Lightbringer is so insane in a minute when I go through all of the skills. Dust Shroud is really good because it gives you a CC break, but I'm running CC break on my Aether jump. So ultimately I get you get kind of this ebb and flow between willpower and rage, which appears to be really intentional within the game. And so you get in a situation where you're just pouring out spells, you're keeping your rage above 750, which is also important because of this node right here, which is going to give you 100% rage cost when the rage is over 750, but the damage is effectively doubled. Okay, so ultimately you want to have the situation where you're debuffing the enemy, you're using Anomaly to group things up, you're jumping on them to stun with Lightbringer, applying more ailments, and then from there you're, casting a few bleeding edges, and then repeating, or you're dropping back a tier if it's a bigger mob and you want to throw in some fire ailment as well if you're really trying to bolster it in that way. And then you just kind of get this rotation going where you're effectively grouping and stunning and buffing yourself. The reason Lightbringer is insane is because of this node right here. There's the fact that it can shock, weak and shock is really nice. The fact that you have the opportunity to stun is also extremely nice. But the fact that you jump on a group of enemies and the amount of resistance you get brings you up to like 25,000 in a large group, going from something like 6 or 8,000. So that's effectively going from 65% mitigation towards whatever damage you're taking to something like 85, which is an extremely large form of mitigation. Okay, so that's why I think Lightbringer is so effective. I think it's a huge defensive bonus as well. This is more of a glass cannon-y type of playstyle. It's not one where you can sit and tank everything in the game and not really think twice about it. It's an active playstyle. You're constantly punished if you do things improperly, but you're rewarded with higher clear speeds. My best clear speed currently, clear time, is 2 minutes and 6 seconds in a 187. That's post nerf after all the bleeding edge stuff has gone through, and that's also not including this node right here, which is broken currently, Life's First Movement, which, if it works as a multiplier to your base damage of your attack and spell damage, and it goes back and forth and ramps, this node right here will be insane if it functions similar to residual energy. If this is merely taking the increases, like 40% material damage on gloves, and applying that at 50% of the value to my spells, then in reality I'm not going to take this, and it's not really that big of a deal. Okay, so in terms of the gear, the big gaping flaw that I see in a lot of these builds is the amount of ailments that they're actually able to stack. A lot of people kind of come at it from a standpoint where they just think, oh, I'm doing fire damage with a spell, like wings, or with like a shield charge, and I'm ultimately going to get enough ailment stacks to be potent. But in reality, you're hitting the enemy, and maybe you have this node, Insidious Decay, where you're getting 2 ailment stacks inflicted, and maybe you're doubling it, right? And so maybe you're going from 1 to 2, right? Or 3 in this case total, and then you're doubling it to 6. So you shield charge and you get 6 ailment stacks, which is nice, right, for 5 seconds. But it's not like you're going to get a second shield charge, and some of these skills are not things that you're spamming, so you're only getting 6 stacks out of it, as opposed to the potential 30 that you could be stacking because of all the things that you have on your tree, giving you +5 ailment stacks here, and there, bringing you up to 30 ultimately. So what I think is really important is to pick skills that have repetitive casts, and also getting +2 ailments wherever you can. So I have it on every ring, and I have it on my amulet. So I have 2, 4, 6, plus my original puts me at 7, and then I have the doubling node, so I'm stacking 14. So anytime I do anything, I'm effectively stacking 14 ailments at a time, and ultimately that's going to allow you to sit at 30 stacks pretty much all the time on anything that you're dealing with. Mainly because a lot of these are casting with, they repeat ultimately. This repeats multiple times with the Vortex. This repeats with Ice falling multiple times. And yeah, as a result, the amount of ailments that you have are pretty much at the top tier, where you're capitalizing on the... oh, good. Didn't mean to hit that. Where you're capitalizing on the node. Okay. In terms of other things going into this, you've got AoE on the Vortex, you've got skill duration, movement speed when you're walking through them. It's just a little bit of a quality of life. Pulls in multiple times, that's a must-have. Ailment chance score, pretty much always want it with stasis. Pretty much anything you're doing, that's what we're dealing with here. Skill allows 2 vortexes. This basically forgoes the cooldown on the Vortex, which is pretty nice to have. From the 8 seconds, you can cast it twice in that window. Lightbringer, we got the huge resistance node, weakness shock, temporary force shield. This is just because there's not a single point that actually seems to do more, because we don't sit and charge it, we just like leap instantly. Heal self and allies might be worth it, might not. I don't know what the value is on this. There's again nothing that leaps out at me. I'm already applying stasis, nothing that seems to be better. Ailment chance score, which is always nice, and then the stun, which is pretty handy to have, especially when dealing with untainteds. Bleeding Edge, typical nodes, you got proj speed, you got rage cost reduction, which you may or may not need, but it is nice to have, especially with the doubling, right? Because effectively this is more or less 54 less rage on the on the skill, unless this is already calculated in at 27, and it would have been half, with some rounding error. Over here you got Ink AoE, gotta have it. Skill duration +1, it's quality of life, and then the ailment stack. For Juggernaut, it's just anything that increases the shield size. That's pretty much it. Just more shield size, less cooldown. Pretty straightforward. A lot of these are interchangeable. If we had block chance, we would actually care about this node, but in reality, we don't stack any block, and we don't stack any dodge, and we don't die very often at all. If I die, again, it was my fault. It was an Untainted was charging up a swing. I didn't move out of the way. He was charging and going to put me up on a spike. Didn't get out of the way. And honestly, I like having those things in the game. I like having the dodge mechanics. It's one of those things that makes it engaging. If I'm just sitting there, I played a max block build, with like 75 efficiency or 69 efficiency, I think it was. And it just basically, it isn't for me. Not what I'm looking to do. I'd rather blast through the map. When I have perfect play, I get rewarded for it. When I don't, I get punished for it, and I'm fine with that. In terms of the rest of the gear, you got a pretty disgusting dagger. The reason that you want to have this dagger the way it does is you want to have material damage, because that's effectively the highest damage you can get, because it's also going to dip into the base fizz that's on the weapon itself from the material damage percent. That could be higher. That could go up to like 49, but the rolls are pretty good. Elemental ailment chance score. That seems a little bit odd to have with a material dagger, but the reason why that's a huge deal is because I'm using Frostweave. Frostweave basically takes my cold damage and makes it so that instead of having a chance to freeze, I have a chance to crit, and it basically rolls it that way. So elemental ailment chance score, this is just straight crit. That elemental ailment chance score just results in basically another roll of attack critical chance score. So anywhere I can grab that, I will. So going through the tree real quick, hopefully with that brief description, or not so brief, there's a little bit of an understanding of kind of what the methodology is. So we're going to be looking for things that have crit damage, anything with ailment chance score, anything with elemental ailment chance score, if it's convenient and close and relatively good, pound for pound. You got some big nodes that you have to hit, okay? So right here you have the crit chance score. Pretty convenient. It's along the path. You're coming out of the red side anyway. You pick up the crit damage. Just so you are aware, like the amount of crit and crit damage we have in this build is 67% chance to crit and 421% crit damage. That's pretty substantial. I mean, you're looking at effectively 321, 3.2 times the amount of a standard hit, assuming the original 100 goes away. And yeah, it's a big hit, and it's happening all the time. Let's see. Going through all that, you have residual energy. This is more or less like from PoE. It's an extra damage thing. You take whatever you got from your spell, you take 30%, you slap that on your attack, and all of a sudden you're hitting for that type, which is going to allow you to stack ailments with bleeding edge faster as well. And past that point, you just get a big fat amount of damage. This goes hand in hand with Child of Fury, Frenzied Blows. This is just scaling up my willpower and my max rage, bringing it to around 1500. Makes it way more comfortable to deal with the staying above 750 thing. You can not take those if you don't want to, if there's something else that you think has more value. These are probably the first to go. This is more or less like a quality of life. And if you're playing extremely vigilantly, you don't need this. This is more or less a comfort thing. Going through here, you have ailment chance score. I path through the elemental ailment chance score as opposed to the material. The reason being, bleeding edge is going to be because I'm applying 14 stacks per hit, and I'm hitting so frequently with Bleeding Edge, and I'm stacking up to 30, you're effectively hitting that 30 cap all the time. You don't need more material ailment chance, and this gives me crit by taking that. 1 point in radius for picking up health globes. This seems like a mistake in most cases, but the amount of radius that you're getting is enormous. Okay, radius is huge in these sorts of games because it's not like it's a non-meaningful value. It's a huge amount of area you're gaining to the circle, and so you're picking up. It honestly feels like you pick up some globes, and then this you sweep everything. Everything just goes like a vacuum into your into what you need. Okay. So the reason that you care about that is because you also are getting poison globes, okay, down here from Plaguebringer, Undertaker. The reason this is a really good node is because this is going off of total damage. There are only so many nodes on the tree that effectively are more multipliers. There are ones that are going to actually increase your total damage and not just go into the same bucket that is like an increase, right? So if you had 5 buckets of water and one's already 50% full and you add 10%, that's basically 1/5 of the 10% increase, right? But if you had 5 buckets and you say give it 10% more and you get like a straight 10%, it's a substantial difference. It's not 2%, it's 10%, right? So you take something like this, and as far as I understand this is going to give you an additional 30% damage as poison, and the additional 30% damage as poison is more or less going to scale further with the more multipliers of like the ailment stack or other things going on where you have like crit multi is effectively a more multiplier when you get down to it. Over here you have crit damage. This is more or less just because it's convenient, and yeah, it's good. I don't know if it's the best thing if everything gets fixed. If every node's working, I'm not actually sure that this is like the end all be all of pathing, but it's fine. Over here, you have basically an attack speed steroid when you crit. It's just more crit. This and this, these are just basically flat crit. This probably gives you something like, I don't know, 10% maybe crit between here and here. It's meaningful, but it's just also convenient. This is where kind of like the magic happens and all the purple stuff. Okay, so like here, extra damage from your spells. Here you're catching more ailments, but here is where you start to have things that you absolutely need. You need to have maximum ailment stacks. Every build that stacks ailments has these. You basically want to bring those up because in theory you're effectively going to get, if it's 2% more per stack and you're stacking, 10 more of each element, you get 3 elements, you get 30, and each one's 2, and it ramps it, basically. Over here, this node I've heard is broken. I don't know if that's actually conclusive. I don't know if people have done reasonable math on this. I don't know if they've looked at the code. It's not unreasonable to assume that this is a potent node, because in reality I have like 5 stacks always at 30, and ultimately I'm getting 150%. I have like 6 stacks in reality, but it's 125 to 150% increased damage. Now, increased damage is usually not better than more, but with enough increased damage, it is potent, and I think that's where this falls into that camp. Over here, this is effectively a doubling of your ailments node. So if you would have applied 4, now you're going to apply 8 when you take these 3 nodes. So that's a really big deal, especially when your number starts getting higher, right? Because if you got 2 and you double it, you're at 4, that's okay. But in my case, I'm at 7 and I'm applying 14, and then that just basically means that I only need 2 and some applications to cap out. So my, reliance on casting rate or frequency goes down. The reliability goes up. Over here, 1 additional ailment, so now you can do poison rend, you can do 2 at a time. You aren't just applying 1. Over here, the big deal is Furious Appetite. Right here, willpower is now generated into rage. That's really just unnecessary evil. There's no other way around it. You won't feel good if you're casting your spell and then you cast 6 blade or 6 bleeding edges in a, keep wanting to say blade vortex from Pee-wee, 6 bleeding edges in a row. It's not going to do it for you. Okay, over here, branded burst. I take this because I have no other defensive that's really potent. it's effectively going to mitigate the amount of total damage that I'm going to take by a substantial amount for each one, as long as I don't get hit often. Now, this is extremely symbiotic with dodge, and perhaps if I, you know, min-maxed around dodge in my gear, it would feel even better. But I was originally going down to Salvatore Anchor, but the problem is if you're using Frostweave, you're kind of screwing yourself, because in reality a big chest of like 1,000 resist is what you're hoping for, and then you're doubling that, right? So that, you know, 1,000 resist turns into 2,000, then all of a sudden now you have all your scaling because you're pathing through all these for all resist score, and you're catching, you know, all of a sudden you're at 80% mitigated damage because you're going that way, but you aren't crit based when you do that. Or if you do go crit based, you're never going to exceed, you know, 60% crit and not have an enormous amount of trade-offs for other things that you're attempting to do, right? So over here we got Global Leech. I just grabbed this because it's 1 point, it's on the way, you don't need it, you have 1% leech, you're going to cap it out anyway. This is just more or less because I haven't quite decided whether I'm going to go for Persistence Hunting and Overwhelming Barrage. The reason this is big is because it's, again, going to give you more crit because of the freeze chance. I would then be dropping Captured Velocity and Countdown. I am under the impression that this is more or less something that scales off of a base attack speed and cast speed. I have to test how potent it really is. It appears to go from like 119 added weapon speed to 130%. I don't know if that's enough to care about. It's more of a feel thing. I like when the build feels snappy and I'm able to, you know, basically go from Aether jumps into bleeding edges into spells relatively seamlessly. And because there's no animation canceling in the game, I think it's pretty pivotal to have some amassed amount of attack and cast speed. So yeah, this is something that's kind of on the chopping block. It very well could be. This will go, in which case I'll go boom, boom, boom. And this node right here is fine because everything's always going to have stasis on it. But the thing about it is, I don't know if it's a more multiplier like, you know, Tomb Fists and PoE, because effectively an increased damage taken on the mob is treated as a separate bucket than the increased damage that you're doing. So I'm not sure if that's actually the case. It doesn't matter in either case. This is probably better than grabbing these two in this point. It's just this feels better, and I have a lot of damage anyway, so it feels fine. Yeah, and that's more or less the tree. So what the general strategy is, I'll run a map, and yeah, I mean, I'll run it. It'll probably be some, you know, terrible layout, but we're going to give it a shot. Hopefully we get some super juice density and we just blast through it and it looks great. And that way you're fooled into thinking this is some like a 2-minute running build every time, you know, even though it ranges. Like usually it's like, honestly, on average, 3.5, maybe 4 minutes, sometimes low 3s, you know, kind of depends how you're playing. But you can definitely get sub 3 like pretty often on good map layouts. And but sometimes it's like 6 because the map layout is shit, you know, and yeah, that's just how it goes. But yeah, I'll show you some gameplay.
What do you want?
So I'll go 187, and we will go with like, let's go with that. Bleeding, speed, extra enemies, and speed. Okay, we'll go on Tainted. This is 187. It's not like 150 or whatever the case is. It's definitely like a reasonable map to do. Oh, we got a guy on the map. Let me see, is this guy here? You mind popping out of here? I forgot to, just so that the health of the mobs is like reasonable for like a solo. Yeah, appreciate it. Okay, so, you know, get some bleeding edges, go here. I'm going to use Aether to group it all up. So when I'm proccing Aether here, I'm looking at my rage. I don't really care that it's dropping below 750 because these mobs have such low health relative to my damage that it doesn't really matter, right, at this point. If I dip below it, and it gives me a little bit more juice to Aether jump, right? I can go further distance with my Aether jump without being kind of disrupted. So it's just a little bit of like an intentional trade-off. But once I have, you know, Untainted showing up, I'm definitely gonna handle it a little different. Speaking of which, these guys are threatening to pop out. There we go. One pops out. Die relatively quickly. Not even staying above, you know, the aforementioned 750 consistently. And we're not even debuffing with fire currently, right? So if we wanted to really kind of do the ultimate thing here, we're going to drop the fire after we drop the Aether. Going to drop the stun right there, and, you know, everything's like basically max debuffed. Okay, I'm gonna tank this hit. This guy almost kills us always, right? So this is like where it gets like really sketchy, right? But you can just like stun him and then just blow him up instantly because your damage is that high. So I think it's pretty important to show like what it's like when you take damage. You definitely can just get, you know, in a bad way pretty quick. But these are like, you know, that's like a tough mob. We get the boss spawn. Okay, this is like powerful regen. This guy hits like a truck most of the time. But you know what? I mean, it looks like Bleeding Edge is like not even nerfed, you know? It just kind of like tears through. So that was like talking through the run. Not ideal play. You know, 3-minute run. It's like pretty juicy, pretty nice. Build works great. You know, that's it. So that's the guide. If you have any questions, it's a little different than other people's take on Bleeding Edge. Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people like Salvatore Anchor. I think it's nice. I think if you're gonna go like the Frostweave deal, it's you can't really do it. It's not worth it pound for pound, right? And realistically, I'll just show my gear, just because like you gotta have a sense of what you're dealing with, right? So my helm has transfer rate, it has CDR, and it has some resist. This is a helm that I rolled because I was running Salvatore Anchor. It was more important. I probably will swap this out for something else at some point, just like a better roll in general. I have several other ones for something like that. Frostweave, okay chest, gives me a lot of crit. Trial Belt gives me Mac Clear. Everybody knows what it does. Gloves, we're just stacking toughness. That's kind of all I did because I wanted to have a decent amount of health. And because I knew I could ramp the damage other ways. I didn't want to, you know, because you kind of go the Frostweave route, you don't really have to go Wisdom or like you don't have to go Ferocity for crit, right? You kind of stack like directly into toughness. So everything's tried to have toughness on it, tried to have some rage and willpower cost decrease on everything I could. I picked that up on like my gloves, my shoulders. My pants are just transfer time, CDR. I just threw life in these because ultimately I have no block or block efficiency I really care about. I could block because this helm gives me chance for any weapon to block. So I could do that, and I could grab the Sacred on the block right here. It's 1 point away for the weakness stacks, but in reality, my block chance is low enough, and the amount of like Sacred I'm doing is high enough to where I have weakness up all the time, so that doesn't matter. The rings, I looked for 2 mods. Well, actually, you'd like 3 or 4 in reality. There's 4 really, really good mods, right? So 2 ailment stacks, it's really nice. Attack gained from spell, also really nice. Elemental resistance score is not the one you want. What you want is all resistance score. That's going to scale all of them. It's huge on jewelry if you can get it. It's like this, right? 39 to all resistance score. That is absolutely great. But yeah, you want ailments kind of as a priority just because it's going to increase your damage the most. the attack gain is probably the second most, and the crit damage is probably the third most in terms of the damage. The elemental resist score, or I'm sorry, the all resist score is more important if you're running Salvatore Anchor. If you're running Salvatore Anchor, and you've got, you know, no Frostweave, and you're going to go like a little bit of a derivation from what I'm going, and that's not to say that you couldn't make it work around that, because the reason this is so high damage is not just because it's crit. I mean, the amount of damage you're getting because of Mackfesten and because of the rings is large anyway, and because of the fact that you're stacking ailments properly is kind of the lion's share as to why you're doing so much damage. The fact that you're going from like 25 crit to 70 crit is a huge deal, but it's not like you can't do the content without it. Okay. Yeah, anyway, ailment on the neck, crit damage, all resist. This toxic damage to attacks, it doesn't matter anymore because I've got, you know, so much on my weapon. You do have to have one frost damage with attacks. You have to have frost damage coming from something, right? You can put it on you can put a frost damage jewel or a gem inside your weapon if you wanted to, but this is a little bit better because this is going to scale off the material, so it's like a little min-maxi. Yeah, I mean, I got some movement speed, material damage on everything. I'm not even sure if material damage on everything is right anymore. This is kind of like a relic of the old way to build Bleeding Edge, but now with the fact that I'm grabbing so much damage from like a different element, I think something like all damage is actually higher damage consistently, right? I'm not positive on that because my Bleeding Edge, like if you look at it, right, the amount of damage coming from Rend and Poison are both like material and they're both large, right? But if you do some, here, you get to do this, it's a little awkward. But if you throw that on there and you look at Aether, now I'm picking up 26k, right? I mean, Aether's officially the highest damage output on the Bleeding Edge at that point. And that'll be the same with Sacred, that'll be the same with Fire, it'll be the same with any of these because they're taking your base value. So, I mean, in reality, material damage this is not important. Like, the amount of material damage increase, this is not, I'm going to sell this gear in reality, and I'm going to pick up other gear. Because this is the kind of stuff, like, Bleeding Edge typically is building around material damage, thinking, oh god, it's the greatest thing known to man. And in reality, it's like, no, I'd rather have anything. Like, if I could get elemental ailment chance on anything, I don't even know if you can run it on like gloves, shoulders, or boots, or pants, or I don't know if you can hit it on anything, but if you can, I'm going to get that. You know, you can't get ailment application, right? Ailment chance score. So honestly, ailment chance score is crit. So if I got crit ailment chance score on everything, that's big. That's probably BIS. That's going to be higher damage than flat % damage of anything for me. But yeah, hopefully that helps with the guide. Hopefully, hopefully that's a useful thing for you guys. I think it's different. I think the mentality that everything needs to be behind like a block shield. And just so just so it's known, I have, effectively a Aether block. I have an Aether jump block shield, right? I was running this previously. So it's not that I haven't tried the other builds and thought, oh, my way's better because it's special. I have tried them. I haven't tried two-hand as extensively as I think I should. But in reality, when I just look at what it means to run two-hand in comparison to running a Catalyst, I can't see how the math would work out any other way. So anyway, hopefully that works out for you guys. If you have any questions, you can always ask me on Discord or in my stream or whatever the case is. I don't like stream professionally or anything. This is just a hobby, and I use it for my woodworking streams most of the time. So anyway, hopefully that helps, and thank you very much. Okay, that's the end of that. I'll be right back in a minute. I'm gonna tuck my wife in. Yeah, what's up, man?